Hey, Health Hustlers. It's your girl J Dog with another episode of Health Hustlers. And this week we have Meredith Jones. Meredith is a 32-year-old accountant living in Dallas, Texas. She's been married to her wife, Wendy, for 10 years now, and they have 5-year-old twins that are about to start kindergarten. 5 years ago, Meredith went to the doctor's office for a routine visit, and that's when her life changed. Meredith, can you tell me a little bit more about that doctor's visit?
Hi, J-Dog. Thank you for having me on the show. I'd love to share my story. Growing up, I lived a normal life as any other girl living in Seattle. I played basketball and was in the debate club in high school. I never had a good relationship with my parents, so I knew I wanted to go somewhere far away for school. I went to University of Florida, and that's where I met my beautiful wife, Wendy. She was from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so that's where we moved after I got my bachelor's degree in professional accountancy. That's when all of this started. A few months before we adopted the twins, I noticed some morning joint pain. I made the excuse to myself that I didn't drink enough water the day before, but the following day when I tried to drink more water, it never really helped. I found myself becoming anxious and then depressed and telling myself that I'm not good enough for my twins, my wife, or even myself. I found myself taking ibuprofen daily to help my pain, and I knew that I needed to see a doctor to get help. About 5 years ago, I went to my primary care doctor complaining of joint pain in my hands, feet, and knees. I could barely clench my hands in a fist, and squeezing the doctor's fingers hurt.
Wow, Meredith, I can't imagine going through that as a newlywed. That must have been so hard. We actually have your primary care doctor with us today as well. Dr. Abby, can you tell me a little bit about how you identified the cause of Meredith's pain?
Well, first, J-Dog, I just want to say thanks so much for having me on your show. I've been a big fan for many years now. She came in a while back for her annual well check, but this time she was complaining of new joint pain. At this time, she and her wife, Wendy, had just adopted those two twins, so I just laughed and said, "Welcome to motherhood, Meredith." I decided to draw some labs and take x-rays just to see what was going on. Turns out she had severe inflammation in her joints, and her CRP levels were way high. Given her history of hypothyroidism, I diagnosed Meredith with rheumatoid arthritis. I wanted to get Meredith some specialized help, so I referred her out to a great rheumatologist.
Hi, I'm Brittany. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I've loved getting to know Meredith and watching her adapt to this new season. I remember the day well whenever she first came in. It was my first shift after passing the NCLEX, and I had been working a night shift when she came in the early morning. I could tell she was scared. All of her vital signs were elevated. She was pale and sweaty, and she kept asking what was wrong with her. I had her rate her pain on a scale of 1 to 10, which she gave a 7, and then we began our journey of identifying the priority problem.
So, Nurse Brittany, what kind of things did you talk about with Meredith regarding her joint pain?
Well, first I explained to her what was going on with her pain, that her joint pain occurs when receptors are activated in her joints, which causes the local inflammation and pain reaction. I explained that pain causes the stress response to be initiated in her body as well, which is why all of her vital signs were elevated. We discussed how her initial priority problem was to identify the cause of the pain and then how to manage it. We talked through some range of motion exercises to prevent contractures and stiffness. And then we talked through the RICE treatment, which is rest, ice, compression, and elevation, and how to incorporate that into her daily routine. The health promotion that we talked about included no smoking, increasing her fluid intake, increasing physical activity as tolerated, and good nutrition. The last aspect of care that we addressed regarding her joint pain was how mental health and emotional care can affect her pain. So she needs to be sleeping well, managing anxiety, fear of the unknown, and healthy communication skills. Ultimately, we just established a baseline to move forward in her care.
So, Meredith, can you tell me a little bit about how you and Wendy handled the pain of rheumatoid arthritis, and what did your original plan of care look like?
Yeah, my original plan of care involved a lot of natural remedies. I got my medical marijuana card and began using CBD oil along with other essential oils. And this helped a lot with my pain. I wanted to take the more holistic approach handling my pain and didn't want to take medicine unless I really had to. Wendy was also a great support and constant in my life, always being there by my side and helping me in pain.
I'm glad you found some things to help get you through this hard season in your life. Dr. Abby, can you explain to us a little greater in depth what CAM therapy is, and what was your thought process behind helping to create Meredith's plan of care?
Sure. So basically, CAM is just a bunch of alternatives to help reduce Meredith's pain without having to jump into traditional medication, since I knew this was not what Meredith was wanting. For example, some CAM therapies might include essential oils, medicine, meditation, and guided imagery. Ultimately, we wanted to avoid the medications for as long as we could to meet the requests of Meredith.
So, Meredith, you were hopeful that your joint pain would get better through the lifestyle changes mentioned, But tell me though, how did you handle this diagnosis emotionally? Did you have any family support at this time?
Well, I have the support of my wife, but my parents don't support me. We haven't talked since I left for college, and they don't really support me being lesbian. I sought a counselor when I was trying to figure out my identity and wasn't getting the support from my family. That being said, I've not involved my parents in any of my health problems. I continue to see a counselor as well as getting support from Wendy, and I believe that my counselor is here with us today.
Hi guys, I'm Jordan. I've been Meredith's counselor for about 7 years. When I first met her, she had just come out to her parents who were not supportive and she didn't have many close friends. She had also just been diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and so we were trying to navigate all of that at once. It was a really heavy and dark time for Meredith, and so we were trying to incorporate some healthy coping skills for Meredith to practice in her everyday life.
Wow, Meredith, I'm so glad that you found a great therapist before your medical problems even began. And it sounds like she helped you navigate through this time as well. Jordan, you mentioned Meredith's coping skills that she learned during this time. Can you tell me a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so it's really important when trying to find coping skills that work for you that you make sure to find something that you enjoy. For Meredith, it was spending time outside, exercising, doing yoga, and journaling. Spending time outside is just good for your whole body, and nature can be calming and relaxing. By exercising and doing yoga, it gives Meredith an outlet to release any built up emotions, and it also gives her time to be by herself and just think.
Our favorite thing to do as a family is to pack a lunch and take it to the lake and have a picnic. Tim and Tina love to bring their mini fishing poles and make sandcastles on the beach. All of these activities were helpful, but my health was worsening. Along with the pain I was in, I also noticed that I was sunburning more easily when we would have these picnics. I was also having a low-grade fever and was getting more fatigued. I was having a hard time keeping up with little Timmy running around everywhere, and I developed what was known as a butterfly rash on my face when I thought it was just a sunburn. I knew that I needed to figure out what was causing these weird things with my body.
So you were in and out of the hospital a lot with your joint pain, and you had a weird rash on your face and lots of vague symptoms that were arising. Where did you go from there?
Yeah, well, I decided I better get back and see Dr. Abby and tell her about these new weird symptoms that I was experiencing. So I made an appointment with her right away.
When Meredith came back into my office with more symptoms and continued pain, my heart ached. Listening to Meredith's new symptom complaints and some new assessment findings, like a pleural friction rab, this led me to conclude that she had lupus. Coming to this diagnosis was a lengthy process, but I received a lot of help from her rheumatologist as we worked to rule out other diseases.
Whoa. So let me get this straight. 6 months after your initial doctor's visit, when you were told you had rheumatoid arthritis, you got an additional diagnosis of lupus?
Yeah, that's correct. I have to admit it was bittersweet, but I was happy to find out the cause of all these things that were happening to my body. But I didn't even know what lupus was. I have to admit, when they mentioned the term chronic illness, the term chronic is what scared me the most. How was I going to live with this the rest of my life? If I didn't manage it well enough, would Tim and Tina grow up without one of their moms? It was definitely not the direction that I saw my life going.
This was definitely not the diagnosis that we were hoping for, but man, were we thankful to have a concrete diagnosis. I ended up reaching out to Nurse Brittany for her patient education expertise.
We had a lot to talk through that would change what she had always known to live with her new normal. We made a plan for her to conserve energy and pace herself throughout her day. As you've heard from her, she's hardworking and doesn't have much downtime, so this was a difficult adjustment. We talked a lot about stress management. We had to learn what Meredith enjoys that can calm her down because stress is a major trigger for this disease. She had to learn how to avoid exposure to infection and to be aware of those around her. We discussed her medical and laboratory follow-ups as well and the importance of adhering to those appointments and medications. A chronic illness causes a lot of changes for the patient, and there's a lot of things that you don't think about until you're the one facing the personal diagnosis. She's still learning, but she has come so far since her first initial diagnosis.
Being diagnosed with lupus has been difficult, and I'm scared that it will get worse, but I'm thankful that we have a team to help me find the root of this problem. I had a strong belief in the naturalistic approach beforehand, but after I talked with my doctor about the benefits of medicine, I came to an agreement.
Yeah, so Doc, what kind of meds did you prescribe for Meredith?
Well, our goal was to get her on the lowest dose to help meet her natural approach. So I prescribed her hydroxychloroquine and a daily low-dose aspirin to help decrease the body-wide inflammation. I'm also able to call in prednisone whenever she's having an acute flare-up, and she's still taking her levothyroxine for her hypothyroidism.
Wow. And when did you start seeing the effects of these medications, Meredith?
I first started feeling some relief after about 3 months of taking hydroxychloroquine, also known as Plaquenil. I was a little skeptical about the medications, as I mentioned before, but I knew that this would last my whole life, so medications were inevitable if I wanted to get help. I have to say, though, the biggest thing that helped me was changing my diet. Abigail, my dietitian, and I had a couple of sessions, and she walked me through some small changes. She's actually here today.
Hi, I'm Abigail, Meredith's dietitian. We changed her diet by taking out foods that cause inflammation and adding foods that were sure to keep her healthy and her immune system strong. We took out foods high in sugar and salt like sodas and processed meat. She now eats anti-inflammatory foods such as green leafy vegetables, whole grains, healthy oils, and nuts. Meredith keeps her immune system strong by adding broccoli, yogurt, green tea, and citrus fruits into her diet as well. Overall, a healthy heart diet keeps her inflammation down and her immune system strong.
The foods helped so much. Things were finally starting to look up. I was also still using my CBD and essential oils, as I talked about earlier.
Once she learned how to eat such a specific diet, she got creative with it and now has her kids eating the same way. We discussed ways to get her young ones to eat the same foods so they can be healthy as they are growing up. She now has plenty of recipes for herself and some that are kid-friendly.
Tim and Tina are obviously my main priorities. I had longed for kids my whole life and would do anything for them. My complicated diet actually led to starting the twins with good eating habits early. Wendy also adjusted her diet for me so I wasn't alone. Family meals were something that was very important to me, as some of my few but good memories that I had with my parents were around the dinner table. I know my conversations with them now are few and far between, but those are the memories I will cherish forever. I wanted a good, balanced diet for my twins that were healthy, but also included regular treats that kids enjoy.
Yes, that's okay. Balance is important, especially for the kiddos. You don't have to cut everything out you enjoy, as long as it doesn't become a habit or turn into a negative coping strategy.
So Meredith, are you still meeting with your rheumatology nurse and primary care doctor?
Yes, I still meet with the rheumatologist team every year. And during my checkups, I get lab work done to make sure my medicine is still working. I also make it a priority to go see Brittany whenever I'm in.
I'm so glad she does. I had taken care of lots of patients before Meredith, but she will always be special because she was my first patient as a certified RN. Annual checkups are a part of the treatment plan, but for me, it was always so much more than just a routine appointment. I wanted to make sure everything was going well with her and her family. We have walked through just so many things over those 6 years of unknown, and it has been so rewarding on my end to care for Meredith during this time.
Yeah, and Meredith still comes in to see me annually as well. We do checkups for her overall health, but I also draw labs to see if her lupus is worsening. Recently, I'm proud to say that she has had her regimen under good control, and her inflammation level of CK is at 88. So that's definitely something worth cheering for.
We've mentioned the term chronic illness a lot, but to those listeners who might be new to the podcast, can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, a chronic illness is a progressive condition that can last a lifetime. There's actually a really fantastic book that I recommend y'all check out. It's called Lubkin's Chronic Illness. It talks about how chronic illness can affect a patient's life and has some really good things to think about. One great example is how chronic illness can lead to social isolation due to uncomfortable symptoms and just the time it takes to get to doctor's appointments and picking up meds. I encourage Meredith to continue to see her counselor and draw near to her family for emotional support during this time of walking through a new illness and depression.
Yeah, so some of these considerations that Meredith and I had to think about and work through were all the psychological effects that Dr. Abby just talked about. We had to think about disrupted sleep patterns, fear, and grief. These are all normal reactions to being diagnosed with a chronic illness. Also, anxiety and depression were important to keep in mind, especially since she has a history with these two. Another big thing with Meredith, specifically with lupus, was the butterfly rash, which is a manifestation. This was hard on her body image and self-esteem. She felt very embarrassed that she had a visible rash that was noticed. It could look like she has a sunburn or very flushed or blushing. This can be embarrassing, but it's important to acknowledge that this is part of her illness. She has come to accept the effects of the lupus, and it has gotten better since it started appearing. I know it can be silly talking about mental health considerations when it seems like her physical health problems are so much worse. I bring all this up because of how important having good mental health is in people's lives. One thing that we like to say in our office is that there's no mental health or no health without mental health.
To me, a chronic illness is something that will obviously never go away. But after a few days of processing the new diagnosis of lupus, I knew that this was something that I would have to hit head on if I wanted to live a long and meaningful life with Wendy and our kids. I hadn't met Tim and Tina at this time yet, but deep in my heart, they are who I fought the most for. I wanted to be involved in a loving mother to my kids, as I did not have that growing up. From the beginning, I wanted to fight this chronic illness with everything I had.
When we found out the joint pain was actually a symptom of her lupus, we sat down and just talked through how she was processing the information. We wanted to identify what the illness meant to Meredith. I could have given her all of her medications, appointments, side effects, lifestyle changes, and blah, 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 but none of that was the first priority when Meredith found out that there wasn't a cure that we could offer her. We began to talk through how this illness would affect every aspect of her life that we couldn't just fix for her. We began to talk about what she defined as a good quality of life and what was important to her and her family and everything in between. She was very vocal about feeling powerless and not wanting to adhere to the medication regimen and just feeling overall helpless in her situation. I'll let the psychologist talk a little more about this.
It was really amazing to see Meredith recover and see how far she came. She has had to overcome a lot in the last couple of years, and I am very proud of her. We worked on a couple of things that Brittany talked about. One of the bigger things that we worked on was the concept of powerlessness. According to Lubkin, what Dr. Abby brought in earlier, powerlessness diminishes health and quality of life for those with chronic illnesses. This can come from the lack of control and inability to find a cure. Feeling powerless can make you feel helpless, and this is exactly how Meredith felt, especially since she had a small support system. Luckily for Meredith, she had a really good healthcare team who really cared about her, and she also had Wendy and the twins. One way that she overcame this was through health coaching. This is where patients are actively involved in determining what's important for them and what they want to accomplish.
Those who have been on the podcast before have mentioned things like social determinants of health and ethical issues they face with their illness. Doc, can you explain a little bit about what these are? And then Meredith, can you explain if you have ever experienced any adversity with these things?
So social determinants of health are basically things that help us know how to take care of our patients. It includes their environment, access to healthcare, social support, education, and economic status. So thinking a little bit about Meredith, she lives in a great neighborhood that's walkable. She's got ample access to healthcare. She's got lots of education that helps her understand and communicate. As far as ethical issues go, I know Meredith's expressed to me that she's felt judged by other healthcare providers for her race and sexual preferences. I've worked hard to connect her with healthcare providers that treat her with kindness and are not judgmental.
I have had problems previously with doctors that I felt have judged me in the past for being Black and being lesbian. But the doctors I have now treat me like everyone else, and I'm very thankful. One thing that was hard when adopting the twins was food prices were rising, and I was going to several doctor's appointments to figure out what was wrong. So I made it a priority to budget, and this has helped me a lot when I met with my nutritionist to see what she would recommend.
There are ways to find the foods you need without spending too much money. Healthy foods can sometimes be pricey, but there are ways around the system. We discussed meal prepping, and that way we don't have to go to like fast food restaurants on our way home from work or something like that. We also discussed couponing and going to the store just like once a week.
The last question I have for you, Meredith, is how has a chronic illness impacted your life?
Yeah, living close to Wendy's parents have been a great help to allow me to rest, and being on hydroxychloroquine has helped my joint pain. The team of doctors have been wonderful to work with too. I feel a lot better and definitely more educated on lupus, and I hope you do too. Thank you for listening, and thank you, J-Dog.
Well, Health Hustlers, that's about all the time we have for this week's episode. We want to thank you all for listening, and we want to thank Meredith and her crew for coming on out. Next week, Susan Lee will be joining us. Susan has diabetes, and we are so excited to dive into that more. Well, all right, y'all. Ciao for now, and as one of our loyal and favorite fans would say, stay golden, Health Hustlers.